You're the third one who sat across from me and said those exact words. I thought I knew him. I know. I thought I knew him too. My name is Elena. I'm a nurse. And 6 months ago, I almost became my husband's next victim. Not with a gun, not with a knife, but with something so quiet, so clinical that no one would have questioned it. Not even me. Let me start at the beginning. I met my husband at a hospital fundraiser. His name was Marcus Hale. He was tall, well-dressed, the kind of man who made a room feel smaller just by walking into it. Not because he was loud, but because he had this gravity about him. Everyone turned when he spoke. He asked me what I did. I told him I was an ICU nurse. He smiled and said, "So you know how to keep people alive." I thought it was a compliment. We dated for 7 months. He was attentive, generous, consistent. My mother had passed away the year before, and I was still living in that hollow space grief leaves behind. Marcus filled it. He cooked for me on my night shifts and he remembered small things, the tea I liked, the author I'd been meaning to read, the anniversary of the day my mother was diagnosed. I told myself that was love. Looking back, I think it was research. We got married in October. Small ceremony, his request. "I don't want to share you with a crowd," he said. I thought it was romantic. We honeymooned in Vermont, came back and settled into his house, which was now our house, a 4-bedroom place on a quiet street in Ashford, Connecticut. Everything was beautiful. Everything was exactly right, which is why it took me so long to notice that something was wrong. It started 3 weeks after we got back. I was on a night shift, and one of my patients, a woman named Ruth, 62 years old, admitted for a cardiac evaluation, asked me if my last name was Hale. I said yes. She looked at me for a long moment and then looked away. She said, "Never mind. I'm sorry. I must be confused. I didn't think anything of it." Ruth was discharged 2 days later. The night before she left, she grabbed my wrist as I was checking her IV line. Her grip was stronger than I expected. She looked directly at me and said, "Does your husband have a lake house?" My husband did have a lake house. In northern Connecticut, about 90 minutes from Ashford. He'd mentioned it once, early in our relationship. He said he hadn't been there in years. I told Ruth yes. She let go of my wrist. She turned toward the window. She said very quietly, "His second wife drowned there." I stood completely still. "I'm sorry," she said. "I shouldn't have said anything. Please forget I said it." But I couldn't forget it. I went home that morning, and I sat in the kitchen and I thought about what I actually knew about Marcus's past. I knew he'd been married once before. He told me early on. Said her name was Claire, that she died in an accident 4 years ago, that it had taken him a long time to heal. He didn't like talking about it. I respected that. I never pushed. I had never looked her up. I pulled out my laptop and typed her name. Claire Hale, Ashford, Connecticut, obituary. It came up in 30 seconds. Claire Renee Hale, 31 years old, survived by her father, Dr. Raymond O.C. Cause of death, accidental drowning. The obituary was short and formal and gave nothing away, but at the bottom, there was a small note from the funeral home. It said that in lieu of flowers, donations could be made to a foundation for survivors of intimate partner violence. I closed my laptop. I sat there for a long time. I didn't confront my husband. I didn't call the police. I know people reading this might ask why, and all I can tell you is that when you love someone, or believe you love someone, the mind does something almost involuntary. It looks for the alternative explanation. Maybe the foundation was Claire's own cause before she died. Maybe Ruth the patient was confused or malicious or both. Maybe I was sleep-deprived and spiraling. I went to work the next night and I did my job and I told myself I was fine. But I started paying attention. I started noticing the way my husband spoke about other people's deaths. Not morbidly, casually. He'd read something in the news about a drowning or a fall, and he'd say things like, "You know, when someone drowns in cold water, the body doesn't always struggle. Sometimes it just lets go." And then he'd change the subject, like he'd said nothing unusual. I began keeping a small notebook. Just dates and phrases. Things that felt strange in isolation, but stranger in accumulation. 2 weeks after my conversation with Ruth, I arrived at the hospital for my shift and found a note folded under the windshield wiper of my car. It said, "Please come to the 3rd floor family lounge at 9 p.m. I won't take much of your time. Dr. R. Osei, Raymond Osei, Claire's father." I almost didn't go. I sat in the parking garage for 20 minutes arguing with myself. A part of me said this was trespassing, intrusion, grief from an old man who needed someone to blame for his daughter's death. But then I thought about that obituary, that foundation. And I went. He was already there when I arrived. He was in his 70s, small and careful looking, with the particular stillness of someone who has spent decades controlling his reactions. He was a retired pathologist. He had worked at this hospital for 31 years. He knew the building the way I knew my own apartment. He didn't waste time. He told me that Claire had died at the lake house in November, 4 years ago. The official ruling was accidental drowning. But Raymond was a pathologist. He had seen the toxicology report. There was a compound in Claire's bloodstream, not enough to flag a general tox screen, but enough, in his estimation, to have impaired her coordination significantly. The compound was a sedative, rarely prescribed, easily obtained through certain pharmaceutical channels, the kind of thing a layperson would never think to look for, the kind of thing that, in someone with no prescription history, had no business being in her system at all. Raymond had brought this to the medical examiner. He was told the levels were within a plausible range for someone who occasionally self-medicated. He was told grief was clouding his judgment. He was told gently to let his daughter rest. He didn't let her rest. He spent 3 years looking into Marcus's history. What he found was this. Before Claire, there had been a first wife. Her name was Diane. She died in a car accident in Arizona 6 years ago, ruled as a single-vehicle collision on a mountain road. There was a significant life insurance payout. Then Marcus moved to Connecticut. Then Claire. Then me. I realized, sitting in that family lounge, that I was not a wife. I was a timeline. Raymond looked at me and said, "I'm not asking you to do anything dangerous. I'm asking you to be careful. And I'm asking you to trust your training." I asked him what he meant. He said, "You're an ICU nurse. You've administered hundreds of IV medications. You know what a line looks like when something has been added to it. You know what a patient looks like when they've been given something they weren't supposed to receive." He paused. "Start looking at yourself the way you'd look at a patient." I drove home that night in complete silence. No music. No podcast. Just the sound of the highway and the understanding that the man waiting for me at home might be the most dangerous person I had ever been near. When I walked in, my husband was in the kitchen. He had made dinner. He smiled and handed me a glass of wine and asked about my shift. I set the wine down and told him I wasn't feeling well. He looked at me for just a moment too long. Then he said, "Of course, go rest." From that night forward, I stopped consuming anything I hadn't prepared myself. I told him I was doing a nutrition reset for a certification program at work. He accepted the explanation easily. Too easily, I thought. I started sleeping lighter. I kept my phone charged. I reached out to Raymond through a secure messaging app he'd set up, and we communicated that way. Here's what I want to say, because I know some of you are frustrated reading this and thinking, why not just go to the police? I hear you, and the answer is that Raymond had already tried that 3 years earlier with Claire's case. He was dismissed. We had suspicion and pattern and the word of a grieving old man. We did not yet have proof. And Marcus was careful. He was methodical. He would have known if I moved too fast. So I moved carefully. About 2 weeks after my meeting with Raymond, I was reorganizing the medicine cabinet in the master bathroom, something I'd been meaning to do since we moved in, and I found, behind a row of over-the-counter cold medication, a small, unlabeled pill bottle. The pills inside were small, white, and had no markings. I photographed them before my husband got home. I described them to Raymond. He told me to bring him 2 of them, sealed in a clean plastic bag, without touching them with my bare hands. I did. The next day, he had a former colleague at a private lab run an informal analysis. It was the same compound from Claire's toxicology report. Raymond contacted an FBI agent he had been corresponding with for over a year. a woman named Special Agent Torres, who worked domestic crime cases out of the Hartford field office. She had been building a file on Marcus already, quietly, from a different direction. There had been a financial fraud complaint filed by Diane's family after her death in Arizona. The insurance payout had been investigated briefly and then dropped, but Agent Torres had never fully closed the file. We were no longer alone. But here is where it almost fell apart. My husband came home early one Thursday. I don't know why. He never came home early. I was in his home office, a room I technically had access to but rarely entered, and I was looking through a filing cabinet, not taking anything, just looking, just trying to understand what I was living inside. He opened the office door and stood there. I had a manila folder in my hands. I don't know how I did what I did next. Something in me. Maybe 3 years of ICU shifts. Maybe every code blue I'd ever stood through without flinching. Something just steadied. I looked at him and I said, "I was looking for the car insurance file. You said it was in here somewhere." He looked at the folder. He looked at me. Then he smiled. "That's the wrong drawer," he said. "Car stuff is on the left side." He walked to the cabinet, opened the left drawer, and handed me the car insurance file. His hand touched mine when he passed it to me. His grip was a little too firm, a little too deliberate. He said, "Dinner in an hour?" I said, "Sounds good." I left the room. I walked upstairs. I sat on the edge of the bed, and I didn't move for 10 minutes. Then I texted Raymond 3 words. He saw me. Raymond responded immediately. "It's time." That night, while my husband was in the shower, I packed a single bag. Just the essentials. My nursing license, my passport, my personal phone, a small amount of cash I'd been withdrawing in small increments for 2 weeks. I left the bag in my car. I went back inside and had dinner and watched television like everything was normal. 2 days later, Agent Torres requested a wellness check on me under a pretextual reason that gave me the opening I needed. An officer came to the door. My husband answered, and I stepped forward and said calmly in the presence of a law enforcement officer that I needed to make a statement. My husband's expression didn't change. That was the thing that haunted me afterward. It didn't change at all. He just looked at me, like he was running a calculation. What followed was not a dramatic arrest at the front door. It was slower and more procedural than that, the way real things usually are. But within 72 hours, Agent Torres had a warrant. The unlabeled pills were seized from the bathroom cabinet along with several other items from the home office. Marcus's financial records were subpoenaed. The insurance policies, including one taken out on my life 11 weeks after our wedding, which I had never signed and never been told about, obtained using a digital copy of my signature from another document, were examined. The compound in those pills matched, at the laboratory level, what had been found in Claire's bloodstream. Marcus was arrested on a Tuesday. He said nothing when they put him in handcuffs. He looked straight ahead. I was standing in the driveway. He walked past me, and he did not look at me once. Raymond was there. He was standing by the street with his hands in his coat pockets. When the car drove away, he exhaled. Just one long breath. 4 years of holding it. He came to stand beside me, and we were both quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Claire would have liked you." I couldn't think of anything to say to that, so I just nodded. There are things I'm still processing. I think about Ruth, the patient who recognized my last name, who was afraid to tell me what she knew, who grabbed my wrist and said something anyway. I've thought about what kind of courage that takes, to warn a stranger about something you can't prove, knowing they might not believe you, knowing it might cost you nothing but also might change everything. She never knew what she started. I haven't been able to find her to tell her. I think about the insurance policy my husband took out on my life. 11 weeks. He had waited 11 weeks after our wedding. I don't know if there was a specific timeline he followed. I don't know if he was patient or something slowed him down. I know that I am alive, and I know that the margin between alive and not was much thinner than I ever want to think about. I think about the filing cabinet. That moment in the office when he handed me the car insurance folder and his hand held mine a beat too long. I have run that scene back in my mind more times than I can count. I believe he knew. I believe he made the calculation in that moment and decided to wait, to watch, to see how much I'd found before he moved. And I think the reason I'm standing here talking to you is that Agent Torres moved faster than he expected. And I think about the women before me. Diane, on a mountain road in Arizona. Claire, in cold water in November. I didn't know them. I can't speak for them. But I carry them with me now in a way I don't fully have the language for. What I want to say to you, and I mean this directly, without drama, is this. Trust the thing that feels wrong. I am a nurse. I am trained to read bodies and vital signs and the invisible language of systems under stress. And I still spent weeks talking myself out of what I was seeing. The mind protects us from truths we're not ready for. That protection can kill you. If a stranger grabs your wrist in a hospital room and tells you something that frightens you, stay, listen, ask the question that terrifies you. If there are pills in your medicine cabinet you've never seen before, photograph them. If someone you love never lets you see the whole picture, ask yourself why. If you feel somewhere beneath the daily routine of a life that looks fine, that something is wrong, that is not anxiety, that is not paranoia. That is your body using every tool it has to tell you the truth. Listen to it. I'm still at the same hospital. I work nights mostly. I see Raymond in the hall sometimes. He volunteers in the archives now, 1 day a week, the way retired physicians do when they can't quite let go. We don't talk long. We don't need to. The trial begins next spring. I will be there. My name is Elena. I'm a nurse, and I am still here.